Good leadership will prevent major accidents from occurring. As an industry, we keep having major incidents. So as at the present count, we've probably had around about 7. Some of these things won't clarifying fully, but it looks like 7 major HCRs in 2018. I don't want to make a big thing about the number because the majors go up and down, as you all know, from year to year. Sometimes we have 1 or 2, sometimes it's 6 or 7. The fact is we keep having them. And even if we had 0, then I would only be comfortable if we could all sit together and say, we're having 0 because the barriers are in place, we're maintaining them, they're working on demand when we need them. Because that 0 may simply be luck from year to year. We need that confidence about that the barriers are there and they're working effectively. So, if we're having those incidents, it's right for us to ask, where's leadership going wrong? Because I'm saying leadership matters in all this. And what can be done about it? I firmly believe that it's the behaviour of those people who lead major hazard industries are the most critical factor of all, and one which we often overlook when we consider human factors in relation to major hazards. We consider the behaviours of those who operate the facilities and how sadly sometimes they make errors of judgment in emergencies or unplanned situations which then lead to disaster. We also consider and talk a lot about the culture of an organisation, but ultimately it's the human behaviour of managers and leaders which determines the culture of the organisation. It's what they say and do, as well as how they organise the structure, set rewards that determine the culture and influence the behaviour of everybody in the organisation. In this presentation, I'm going to share some findings from our recent Maintaining Safe Operation leadership audit interventions and our operational integrity inspections. And some of you will have been on the end of those. And explain our expectations around process safety leadership. But before I do, I want to take a step back and talk to you about the findings from the Longford investigation, which was a major incident which, as Steve said, roughly 10 years after Piper, so about just over 20 years ago now, and it occurred in Australia. I used this example with the health and safety managers, well, they were largely health and safety managers present at the OG UK workshop in April this year, so hands up if any of you were in the room that day. Okay, that's good. You're not allowed to answer the question now, Greta, because you know them all. But I will ask a few questions, because if you all know the answers to this, I can skip at least 3 pages of this presentation, which will get us to coffee probably a little bit earlier. But failures in leadership were key to what happened that day. So some of you may well be familiar with it, others less so. So let's just check. So how many people, before Stephen mentioned it, how many people really recalled the Longford plant disaster? That's good. But it's probably only about 20% of the audience, possibly slightly less. And just to check, those who put their hands up, how many of you think you know what happened? So put your hands up if you heard about it again. Let's see how many go down now. So how many of you could describe what you think actually happened? Ooh, Steve, he's been reading the book. It's worth going through this, I think. There are some lessons for us still. And it's interesting that, you know, collectively, we kind of have potentially forgotten those lessons. Equally applicable to us, the fact it happened in Australia, irrelevant. So let's go through this. September 98, Esso's Australia gas plant at Longford in Victoria suffered this major fire and explosion. 2 men were killed, several were injured, and the state's gas supply was severely interrupted for 2 weeks, causing chaos to industries and domestic users. What actually happened was that a warm liquid system, known as the lean oil system, failed, allowing a metal heat exchanger to become intensely cold and therefore brittle. When operators tried to reintroduce warm lean oil, the vessel fractured and released a huge quantity of gas which found an ignition source and exploded. Inadequate engineering controls were in place to prevent operation under such conditions. In addition, operating procedures, training and competence of staff, supervision and auditing were all found wanting. A Royal Commission was appointed to investigate the incident, to find the root causes and make recommendations. This was Australia's Piper Alpha. There's a detailed report arising from that Royal Commission, which is available online. Steve referenced it. It's written by respected Professor of Sociology Andrew Hopkins. He's written many other readable accounts of major incidents, but this one is known as The Lessons of Longford, and if you haven't read it, it is worth looking out. As I say, it was a far-reaching investigation, the equivalent of Lord Cullen's into Piper Alpha. It identified many failings. I'm only going to share just 3 areas which should be of particular interest to us today because they all reflect failures of leadership. First one, inadequate oversight by senior staff. The Royal Commission was critical of inadequate oversight of production process by senior SO staff. SO had relocated all of its engineers from the Longford site to head office in Melbourne in 1992. Some of these engineers were intended to operate from a distance as a plant surveillance group. Excuse me, but the group didn't carry out that function satisfactorily. They didn't visit the site regularly enough or for long enough to get a true picture of what was actually taking place on the ground. For instance, it failed to notice or react to the very high frequency of alarms being generated by process upsets, and it failed to recognise the danger of allowing operators to become accustomed to operating the plant in alarm mode. It was this failure of oversight which allowed critical alarms to be ignored. SO's policy at Longford was to leave the management of process upsets to the operators on the assumption that they knew best. Are there lessons there for us between the beach and offshore in the UKCS? I was pleased to hear recently that a number of companies have now started looking at putting senior engineers back offshore. I think that's a real positive step, and I know that my engineering teams have been pleased to see that as well, because we think that will have a real positive impact. Here in the UK, HSE, as the inspectorate, have found multiple instances through our inspections of senior managers and technical staff not visiting installations they are responsible for. A request for a company's organisation chart, along with dates for when key individuals have gone offshore in the last year, is all it takes to reveal it. Effective engagement between senior management, senior leaders in the industry, and the offshore workforce is not a nice to have. It is absolutely essential. The second area I wanted to focus on from the Longford report is the failure of the safety management system audits. The Royal Commission, severely criticised SO's safety management system and the auditing of it. It said that the SMS, the safety management system, together with all the supporting manuals, comprised a complex management system. It was repetitive, circular, and contained unnecessary cross-referencing. Much of its language was impenetrable. As for the auditing of the system, SO had conducted a major audit less than a year before the explosion. The audit failed to identify any of the problems which gave rise to the explosion, and in particular, failed to uncover the fact that a critical hazard identification process, HAZOP, hazard and operability study, had not been carried out. The Commission states it can only conclude that the methodology employed by the assessment team was flawed. Looking back to home again, the Cullen inquiry into the Piper Alpha disaster also found numerous defects in the safety management system which had not been picked up in the company auditing. Brian Appleton, one of the assessors to the inquiry, asked Occidental senior management why they didn't know about the many failings uncovered by the inquiry. The response he got was, "I knew everything was all right because I never got any reports of things being wrong." Just think about that for a moment. It's a well-known problem that bad news does not travel easily up the corporate hierarchy. Operators need to find ways to overcome this problem. The permafrost that exists in the industry that's often spoken about needs to be sorted. We've issued several improvement notices and enforcement letters in recent times related to inadequate audit systems, and that's just in the last couple of years. Many of the industry's recent major hydrocarbon releases could have been avoided if adequate audits had been in place and the failings in the procedural controls identified. The third area from the Longford report was failure to manage change, management of change. SO's management system required that any permanent change required a risk assessment. However, the policy didn't identify any specific procedures for doing so, or the breadth or scope of such a risk assessment. At least 4 changes have been made to the Longford plant, warm oil and condensate process, between 92 and the time of the incident in 98. Only one of those had been subject to a HAZOP, however, and the rest were either not assessed or only superficially assessed. The HAZOP did identify issues with the risk of constant condensate carryover and low temperature, but these were dismissed as not being significant. This change did not work as planned, causing the system controllers to be run in manual rather than automatic mode, which further increased the risk. There was also no periodic process hazard review, such as a 5-yearly REHAZOP, as would be expected, which might have identified the risk. As a result, between 92 and 98, the system had been modified several times without rigorous management of change processes and with a substantial increase in the frequency of upset events which led to the incident. As well as technical changes, there were also several organisational changes in that period. As I mentioned earlier, Esso had relocated all of its engineers to Melbourne. In 1993, 1996 and 1997, changes were also made to the responsibilities of operators and supervisors. Now guess what happened? The number of supervisors were reduced, the areas of responsibility were increased for those left. No risk assessment of those changes took place. Back in the UK, we continue to find examples of poorly managed change. Unauthorised and unassessed changes, risk assessments of changes that identify hazards but then don't specify control measures, and changes with actions to update management systems not closed out. There was a major release of over 500 kilograms of gas earlier this year due to a small bore tubing assembly fitted to a gas compressor that failed after only 11 days in service. The change had not been adequately assessed. So as you can see, or hopefully you can see, there were many failings at Longford. I've just picked on leadership, assurance and management of change. Good leadership at Longford should have prevented that incident. It is an essential component in running major hazard businesses. It's also worth saying I could have picked on other incidents that have happened down the years from around the world, and we could have pulled out the same lessons, but I think Longford's particularly of interest to us today. And that's why I've repeated it from the conversation we had at the workshop in April. As I said earlier, a number of you will have been on the end of or part of one of our Maintaining Safe Operation leadership audits in the last few years. I just wanted to share some of the findings from that. So we looked specifically at leadership as part of those audits. We asked a number of questions of senior leaders to understand how they manage their businesses. I've got a small sample of some of the questions here. On the processes, we asked what systems do you use to deliver sustainable asset and operational integrity? Under competence and capability, do you have the capability to manage major accident hazards? And on oversight, is there a clear line of sight from the boardroom to operations at your installations? Can you see the impact of your decision-making at the coalface? And how do you know you are achieving and maintaining safe operations? Then we went offshore and did a reality check of what we'd been told on the beach. We found long-term systemic failings in fundamental major accident barriers. Risk management in operational risk assessments, control of work, cumulative risk and risk perception, management of change, safe isolation and reinstatement of plant, information, instruction, training and supervision, monitoring, auditing, review, effectiveness and capability. These were long-term failures. These hadn't happened, as far as we could tell, because of the downturn. These had been sitting there for a long time. I fully accept there's a question for the regulator about why we perhaps haven't spotted some of these things earlier. But these are your businesses, so we're going in and finding them. Why were they sat there for this long? The industry needs to ask itself some difficult questions when we're finding these kind of things about what might be, why this might have occurred or what you need to do to put it right, because it's the only way we're going to improve major accident performance in the industry. There's one story that Ashley Hines, I'm sure some of you will know Ashley, he's our process engineering lead in our offshore section, has shared with me. And it particularly resonates with the theme of leadership. So it was a series of conversations he had as part of an operational integrity offshore inspection. The asset manager and others couldn't answer how well the permit to work system was actually working. I'll lead you through the conversation just in case you can't read it so well at the back. Inspector to asset manager, how well is your permit to work system working? What are the weak areas and what are you doing about them? Asset manager to inspector, the OIM has all the data on that and will be able to take you through it. Inspector to OIM, how well is your permit to work system working? What are the weak areas and what are you doing about them? OIM to inspector. The ops supervisor has all the data on that and will be able to take you through it. Inspector to ops supervisor. How well is your permit to work system working? What are the weak areas and what are you doing about them? Ops supervisor. We've just changed our permit system. My back-to-back is the one to talk to about permit audits. Now, you can imagine as a regulator, we start to get a little bit concerned about things like that, those sort of conversations. Senior leaders need to know what's going on within their business if major accident risks are going to be managed well. You can't make good decisions with poor or no data. It's essential you know what's going on. Let's just turn back to Lord Cullen's report. Senior management were too easily satisfied that the permit to work system was being operated correctly, relying on the absence of any feedback of problems as indicating that all was well. And we're still finding this today. On the last 3 inspections of the topic of safe isolation and reinstatement of plants, these are operational integrity visits carried out by our process team, over this summer, we found that each duty holder had no routine auditing in place for their processes to reinstate plant. They weren't systematically checking that line walking was in place and thorough. They weren't checking they didn't have anything in place around flange brake management, and they did, but they weren't checking it was being adhered to, and there was no leak testing that was suitable going on. That's just this summer on 3 visits. How could this be when Piper Alpha occurred as a result of a failure to reinstate plant safely? It does beg a belief. As senior leaders, you need to be asking yourselves and getting answers to why is this happening on your watch, and then you need to be fixing it. Otherwise, we can always be certain we'll have another major incident in the North Sea. I wrote to you all in April 18. That was part of the letter that we asked. I asked you to describe the measures your organisations either have already put in place since 2015 or will put in place to improve your safety management performance in the area of process safety leadership and audit, assurance and review. Why did we target leadership, audit, assurance and review? That was because it's our belief that those 2 areas have the greatest potential to drive long-term improvement in the management of major hydrocarbon release risk, but in general terms in preventing major accidents just more generally. But we'd focused on HCRs because of what we were seeing. If you get the leadership right, it creates a culture whereby people in the organisation will work more effectively and reduce risk, even if the individual risk control measures are not as good as they could be. They will be more likely to spot hazards, recognise and report non-standard conditions, challenge poor performance and engage in improvement. Now, of course, there are many published texts on what good leadership is all about. There are many business leaders, entrepreneurs, I hesitate to say politicians in this day and age, public figures fated for their leadership qualities. Perhaps we all think we know what makes a good leader, but in the context of process safety, is it quite so obvious what that looks like? Who is your role model on process safety leadership? What do they do that works? And if you're not sure, you need to get up to speed quickly. And what about audit, assurance and review? If you have effective systems for these, they will help you to proactively identify and set upon any weaknesses in the risk management controls before an incident occurs. Over time, the individual controls will improve. Now, although at times it may feel like it in reality, we as the regulator spend a very small amount of time at your installations looking at what you do. Our visits are managed, you know we're coming, and most will try and present themselves in the best possible light. Despite this, we often find simple failings that you could have found and fixed for yourselves. Imagine the powerful force for change that your own internal audit systems could be if they were achieving the same thing. Don't wait for someone else to tell you what to do, especially if it is the regulator. We are not best placed to provide a wall-to-wall instruction manual on managing your major hazard risks. We only have a partial view of how you operate and manage your business. If you want to know who is best placed to provide that, it's you as the industry leaders. Leaders and senior executives cannot confine major hazard safety to the experts and specialists within the organisation. Whether you recognise it or not, your decisions and actions have a direct bearing on the level of risk within your organisation. So you have to be active in managing your major accident hazards. Understand what your level of risk is, how it's controlled and managed. You have to ask the right questions, be able to describe your overall risk profile, and get a clear idea of the important parts. Be clear on the nature and range of your hazards, how and where your controls can go wrong, and the likely consequences. From this, understand the most important control measures within your business that must be effective all of the time. But as leaders, you need to breathe life and commitment into process safety. You need to go out and lead. So how can you do that? And what are our expectations around leadership and you as leaders? The onshore COMA competent authorities have identified those 8 principles as being fundamentally important to effective process safety leadership. They're very similar to those that were developed by the Process Safety Leadership Group, a joint industry and regulator group formed in 2007 following the Buncefield incident. I'll just read out the highlighted text. So, the 8 principles. Safety leadership is at the core of managing major hazard business. Major hazard leadership requires board-level involvement and competence. Good major hazard management does not happen by chance and requires constant active engagement. It needs board-level visibility and promotion to set a positive safety culture. It needs engagement of the workforce. Monitoring major hazard performance needs to be in place. Publication of major hazard performance information, which provides important assurance about the management of risks in an organisation, and sharing of best practice across industry sectors, and learning and implementing lessons. What I'd like to take away today is that, look, we're working up to a conference that Oil and Gas UK are hosting on the 6th of November. There's an industry action plan that the leaders of the industry hopefully will have agreed by then. It would be great if we sign up to the action plan, but also if we sign up to, if not necessarily these, but some other process safety leadership principles that as an industry we will abide by and deliver on. If we do that, then we will start to build, or we will continue to improve the safety performance in the industry. There's plenty of guidance out there as to how to implement these principles in practice, but the essential first step is to sign up to some principles and give that commitment from the leadership in the industry. So I'll leave you with a couple of questions to ask yourself. Of the 8 principles up there, which one is the least well embedded in my organisation? That's for you. And what am I going to do to change that? And if you need any more persuasion to do the right thing on process safety leadership, then remember, we're not requiring you to do this just for the sake of it. We do this to ensure the safety of the workforce. There are people living with these risks day in, day out. Lives are at risk. It will also help to build confidence in the industry. You're competing now with lots of other industries, some of which are cleaner, more sexier, for the same engineers, the same staff. They've got to make a choice about where they want to work in the future. They might not want to work in this industry if its record is not so good compared to others. You also need to maintain that social license to operate. You need to retain that. You've got it. Some industries don't. If you look at onshore oil and gas, particularly hydraulic fracturing, it hasn't got it. It would take one major incident, I suggest, for us to lose that social license to operate in the North Sea. The third reason is because we're delivering the MER agenda. We're not going to deliver it if we have major incidents. The fourth one is because UK PLC needs you to operate safely to provide energy security and resilience. And fifthly, we ought to, given our experience, be leading the world in safety, in offshore safety, and we can sell that know-how. So there's business opportunity there as well. So thank you for listening, and hopefully we can get agreement today to signing up to some process safety leadership principles. Thank you.